Hi, my name's Joanne, and this little video is to show you how to use an online calculation tool to do a chi-squared test. Why this video? Because this is one of those questions that I constantly get asked as a statistician. How do I do a chi-squared test? So I'm going to assume that you have some idea about what chi-squared tests are. The particular chi-squared test I'm going to focus on here is called the chi-squared test for independence. Now, why do we use chi-squared tests in the first place? Very briefly, a chi-squared test is a way of comparing or looking for connections between two different categorical variables. Now, categorical variable is something that we can put into a group or a category. And effectively what we're doing is we've got counts of how many things fall into each category. So the most common question we seek to answer statistically is, are these two categorical variables related to each other or not? We can also think of this as, is there an association between these two variables? Or, more mathematically, it's called a chi-squared test of independence. Are these two variables independent, i.e. there's no connection between them, they're not related to each other, or are they dependent? One depends on the other. The two hypotheses that we're testing here are the two variables are independent, or we can think of the two variables are not related, or we can think of the two variables are not associated. The alternative hypothesis here is, yes, these two variables are dependent, or they're related to each other, or they're associated with each other. So let's have a look at a particular example. This one, we've gone and mined psychology literature here. Okay, so schizophrenia. The question being asked by a paper done in 2012 by Lin et al. Was, can we use neuropsychological testing to predict whether or not someone has schizophrenia? There are actually three different types of neuropsychological tests that they used. The mismatch negativity test, MMN, the Wisconsin card sorting test, the WCST, and the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, or WAIS. And they wanted to see how successful these were in predicting schizophrenia in their patients. So they have data over a number of years where they collated the test results for these particular tests for their patients, and also whether or not the patient had schizophrenia. And the results are shown on our next slide. So here you can see, here is our data. So you can see what we've got here is the standard setup for a chi-squared test. We've got a two-way or categorical contingency table, and you can see we've got two variables. The outcome, which is the patient's schizophrenia status, are they positive or negative, and the three different types of tests we're looking at here. And so we've got counts. What we'd like to be able to do is do this chi-squared test. Now you can do it mathematically by hand. What we're actually going to focus on is using an online calculation tool. Now this is the best one I've found, okay? Any online calculation tool that includes details on how to reference it needs to be reasonably accurate. So at this stage, I'm changing to, I've just done a Google search here, and all I've searched for is chi-squared calculator. The one we're using here is by quantsci.org, by a guy called Christopher J. Preacher from Vanderbilt University. And you can see up the top here, this web utility may be cited in the APA style in the following manner. It explains the purpose of the page, gives us a whole heap of theory behind what the test is, tells us how to use the page. Let's go down and have a look. So what we've got is a testing grid. So I'm essentially going to type in those figures that I had on my slide. So these are my three categories, and these are the positive for schizophrenia, and these are the negative for schizophrenia. And the next thing I'm going to do is push the button that says calculate. And that's how easy it is. Okay, so we've typed in our data in the top left-hand corner of our slide. We've put it in the same way we've got it set up in the table. You can see it calculated the totals for us in both directions. And down here we have our statistics. Chi-squared. Okay, so chi-squared equals 6.128. What does that mean? Well, actually, it's probably more sensible for us to have a look at the p-value. Now remember, well, I'm assuming that you have enough statistical knowledge to understand how to use a p-value. The p-value is how likely is it that we would get a test statistic of this value given that our original idea is true. Very low p-values are support of our alternative hypothesis. So here, our p-value is 0.0467. The standard is, if your p-value is less than 0.05, reject the null hypothesis, accept the alternative hypothesis. Here, we have a p-value of 0.046 or 4.6%. That's less than 0.05 or 5%. So here, we can reject the null hypothesis and say, there is a relationship between the type of test that we use and the accuracy or the capability of predicting whether or not someone has schizophrenia. A couple of interesting things here. If you want to do another test, just press the Reset All button. Down here it tells me the status is okay. One of the problems with chi-squared tests is if you've got very small counts in your cells, it won't work. And then you'll get a warning message here. Okay, if you've got very low counts in your cells, you may need to collapse some categories into each other. I hope you've enjoyed this little tour of how to use the chi-squared testing tool. I'm also going to do a video about how to do the chi-squared goodness of fit test using the same tool.